Have you ever felt like someone had already made up their mind about you before you had the chance to show them who you actually are? Not in a dramatic way, not after a conflict or a confrontation, just quietly. A room where the dynamic feels slightly off. A colleague whose warmth has a faint ceiling. A person who nods when you speak but whose eyes have already moved on. Do you ever get the sense that the version of you they are responding to is not quite you? That somewhere, without your knowledge, a story was written, and now everything you do gets read through it. That feeling is not paranoia. It is not oversensitivity. It is one of the oldest and least acknowledged truths about the way human beings operate. People do not form their opinions of you through careful observation over time. They form them quickly, sometimes in days, sometimes in a single moment, and then they spend a long time looking for reasons they were right. And most of us go through life, not realizing the judgment was already in before we even knew we were being tried. She had worked at the same company for nearly 3 years. Early on, she had been nervous. It was a new environment, unfamiliar faces, a culture she was still learning to read. In her first few weeks, she had been quiet, cautious, mostly in the way anyone is when they are still figuring out the rules. She asked questions carefully. She kept to herself at lunch. She watched more than she participated. Nobody told her that those first weeks would define her. But they did. Over time, as she grew more comfortable, she changed. She became warmer, more willing to offer ideas in meetings, more relaxed in conversation. She thought people were beginning to see her differently, the fuller version of herself, the one that had always been there but needed time to surface. She was wrong. What she could not see, what no one had bothered to tell her, was that in those early quiet weeks, a story about her had already been written. She was the distant one, the hard-to-read one, the one who maybe thought she was a little better than the rest. None of that was true, but it had calcified slowly, invisibly, in the minds of the people around her. And now, everything she did was being filtered through that story. When she laughed freely, someone noted it as unusual. When she pushed back on an idea, it confirmed what they already thought. When she tried to connect, it was interpreted with slight suspicion. The ground beneath her reputation had shifted before she even knew the game was being played. She started to wonder if she was doing something wrong, started second-guessing herself in rooms she used to feel easy in, started performing rather than simply being, trying to dismantle a story she could not fully see and had never agreed to tell. There is something Machiavelli understood about people that most of us spend years resisting. He observed, not with cruelty but with clarity, that human beings are not primarily reasonable creatures when it comes to forming impressions. We are creatures of perception. We respond to what things look like, not always to what they are. And we hold onto those first impressions with a loyalty that has nothing to do with fairness and everything to do with how the mind prefers to work. The mind is efficient. It does not want to keep reconsidering. Once it has formed an image, even an incomplete one, it would rather build on that image than dismantle it. Evidence that confirms the story gets noticed. Evidence that contradicts it gets explained away or absorbed quietly into a footnote that never quite rises to the surface. This is not malice. It is just how perception settles. For her, the difficulty was not that people were cruel. It was that they were human. They had formed a picture in those early months and had, without realizing it, stopped updating it. The version of her that existed in their minds had become more familiar to them than the version standing in front of them. And in a strange way, that mental version, the quiet, distant one, the one who kept to herself, had become more real to them than anything she had shown since. That is the part that takes time to understand. The impression does not just linger, it becomes a kind of template. Every new piece of information about a person gets filtered through what was already decided. If it fits, it confirms. If it contradicts, it gets softened, explained by a good day, an unusual circumstance, something that does not quite count. The template rarely breaks. It just accumulates exceptions until the exceptions themselves become part of the story. And that is the quiet devastation of early impressions. They do not just affect how others see you. Over time, they begin to affect how you see yourself. You start to perform for an audience that has already decided the role you play. You start choosing your words more carefully, editing yourself before you speak, scanning the room for signals that tell you whether you are landing. And the effort of that, the constant, invisible effort of managing a reputation you never chose, becomes exhausting in a way that is almost impossible to name. But here is the part that is harder to sit with. It is not only others who do this, you do it too. Think about someone in your life, a colleague, a family member, an old friend, and ask yourself honestly, when did you last truly update your opinion of them, not adjusted slightly, not added a footnote, but genuinely reconsidered the story you carry about who they are? Most of us do not. We form our picture and we tend it. We notice the things that fit and we quietly file away the things that do not. We think of this as consistency, as loyalty, as simply knowing someone. But it is also a kind of blindness, which raises an uncomfortable question. If we do this to others, and we do, then others are doing this to us. Right now, in every room we enter, in every relationship we navigate. There are people who have already written a version of you, and they are watching you through the lens of that version, not through the lens of who you actually are in this moment. And the unsettling part is that you cannot fully see it. You cannot know exactly what story they are holding or how it formed or which moments they decided were the ones that revealed you. You are moving through the world partly blind to the filters others are using to interpret everything you do. Some of those filters are generous, some are not. You rarely get to choose which kind you are operating under. This is not a comfortable thing to acknowledge. Most of us would rather believe that sustained effort, genuine warmth, and consistent behavior will eventually correct any misimpression. And sometimes it does. But often, more often than we like to admit, the original story holds, and the sustained effort simply becomes another data point that gets absorbed into it. Machiavelli would not have been surprised by this. He thought most people fundamentally overestimate how much they are seen for who they truly are. He believed that in the social world, among colleagues, neighbors, rivals, allies, what passes as understanding is usually something far more superficial. People respond to signals, to surfaces, to the patterns they have already decided are true. That is not cynicism, it is observation. And there is something quietly important in letting it land. The reason this pattern persists in you and in others is not stupidity or moral failure. It is something deeper than that. The mind forms impressions quickly because it has to. You cannot deeply process every person you encounter, so it builds shortcuts, it makes guesses. It assembles a working model of someone from limited information and uses that model to navigate. This is not a design flaw. In most situations, the shortcuts work well enough. The problem is that they were never designed to be fair. They were designed to be fast. The model rarely gets fully revised. New information tends to get absorbed into the existing structure rather than reshaping it. This is why someone who has made a strong early impression of warmth will often be forgiven for being cold later. It gets treated as an off day. And why someone who started off seeming cold will find their warmth greeted with mild surprise or quiet skepticism or simply not noticed at all. The warmth does not compute, so it gets quietly set aside. Machiavelli wrote about the power of appearances not as a manipulation tactic, though it has often been misread that way, but as an observation about how social reality is actually constructed. He noted that people tend to judge by what they see, not by what they investigate, that the image something projects can carry more weight than the thing itself, not because people are shallow, but because appearances are simply more available to them than truth. Truth requires time, patience, sustained attention. Most relationships do not offer that in abundance. And this is where it becomes genuinely painful. Because most of us were raised to believe that character is what matters. That if you are honest, if you work hard, if you treat people well, that will eventually be recognized. But character and reputation are not the same thing. Character is internal and cumulative. Reputation is external and impressionistic. You can spend years developing one and still find the other lagging far behind, stuck in a version of you that no longer fits, maintained by people who have not been paying close enough attention to notice the change. This is worth understanding not because it teaches you how to trick anyone, but because it explains why genuinely being a good person is sometimes not enough, why working hard in silence is sometimes not enough, why simply showing up and doing your best is sometimes not enough if the frame through which others are watching you is already set. The gap between who you are and who others believe you to be is not a personal failure. It is a feature of how perception works. It does not mean you are not being seen. It means you are being seen through a lens you did not choose and cannot fully control. And something about that deserves to be grieved quietly, not fixed frantically. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from this. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of being misread in company, of sitting in a room full of people who think they know you and feeling, in some quiet corner of yourself, that the person they know is a slightly wrong translation of who you actually are. Not wrong in a dramatic way, not wrong in a way that would be easy to point to or argue against, just off. The way a photograph can look like you but somehow not capture you. Something in the angle, the lighting, the frozen moment chosen, close enough to be recognizable, far enough from the truth to feel like a small, persistent injustice. It is the experience of working to correct an impression and finding that your correction itself gets interpreted through the old frame, that the effort you make to be seen is read as trying too hard, that the openness you offer is met with mild suspicion, that the warmth you extend gets filed under unusual today rather than I had this person wrong, that the version of you doing all the work is invisible because it is the hidden version, the one without an audience, the one that only you know is there. And over time, something happens. The gap between your inner experience and your outer performance begins to widen. You start holding more back, not out of coldness, but out of exhaustion. You learn, slowly and without deciding to, which parts of yourself tend to land and which parts tend to confuse or unsettle or get stored in the wrong folder. And you start leading with the parts that work. The rest you keep for yourself or for the one or two people who seem to have gotten it right. This is not a small thing. Over time, it shapes behavior in ways you may not even notice. People begin to perform for the audience rather than living for themselves. They adjust, contract, manage. They become strategic in moments that should be natural. They carry a persistent, low-grade awareness of how they are being received, and that awareness robs something from the inside of daily life, something spontaneous, something light, the part of you that does not need to be managed. Machiavelli understood that the social world runs on performance whether we like it or not performance in the dishonest sense, but performance in the sense that how we appear to others has real consequences for how we are treated, what we are offered, and how much room we are given to be ourselves. He would say that denying this is not noble, it is naive. And naivete has its own costs. So what do you do with this? Not much in the way of action, and that is the honest answer. You cannot fully control how others form their impressions of you. You cannot rewind to the beginning of a relationship and take better notes on how you presented yourself. You cannot force a mind that has made a decision to open itself and start again. These things are mostly outside your reach, and the energy spent trying to manage them, trying to undo impressions, correct narratives, perform your way into being seen accurately, often makes the gap worse, not better. But awareness is not nothing. When you begin to see this pattern clearly in yourself and in the people around you, something shifts. Not everything, not right away, but something loosens. You stop being quite so confused by the gap between how you feel on the inside and how you are received on the outside. You stop taking it as evidence of some fundamental wrongness in you. You begin to understand that the version of you that lives in another person's mind is partly a construction of their own perceptions, their own shortcuts, their own need to organize the world into something manageable. It is not exactly you. It was never going to be exactly you. It is a representation, and all representations simplify. Machiavelli believed that those who understood how perception operates were less controlled by it, not because they became manipulative, but because they stopped being mystified. They could see the game without being consumed by it. They could understand why a room received them a certain way without losing themselves in the effort to be received differently. There is a quality in that, a kind of groundedness that comes not from being well-liked, but from being clear-eyed. That clarity costs something. It asks you to give up the comfortable belief that if you are simply yourself, consistently and genuinely, the world will eventually see you accurately. That belief is lovely. It is also incomplete. The world tends to see what it has decided to see and adjusts slowly when it bothers to adjust at all. Accepting that is not defeat. It is maturity of a particular kind, the kind that does not sour into cynicism but settles into something quieter. There is a form of peace in that, not resignation, not giving up on being known, but a gentle loosening of the grip of needing others to see you accurately, fully, and continuously. That need is understandable. It is also exhausting to carry. Releasing it just slightly changes something in how you move through a room. You stop auditing yourself against the imagined verdict of everyone present. You stop scanning for confirmation that you are landing correctly. You become, in small ways, more present, not to how you appear, but to what is actually happening. And in those moments, something real becomes possible. You are more than the impression you leave. You are more than the story someone formed about you during a hard week or a quiet season or a moment when you had nothing left to give. That story may persist in their minds. It may shape how they treat you for years, but it does not have to shape how you understand yourself. You can know yourself more accurately than others know you, not with arrogance, not defensively, just clearly, with the quiet confidence of someone who has sat with their own inner life long enough to trust what they find there. That knowing, unhurried, unannounced, not requiring anyone else's recognition, is something no one else's perception can take away. It was always yours, it still is. The hidden psychology behind how people judge you is not a mystery to be solved. It is a truth to be held. People see in flashes and remember in patterns. They carry pictures more than portraits, and they update those pictures far less often than any of us would like. Machiavelli did not offer comfort about this, but he offered something rarer: clarity. The kind of clarity that does not make the world softer, but makes you steadier within it. You have spent time today sitting with something most people avoid. The quiet acknowledgement that we are not fully seen, that the version of us others carry is assembled from incomplete information, early impressions, and the natural shortcuts of a mind that is always processing more than it can hold. That is a lot to carry, and you have been carrying some version of it, probably without naming it, for a while now. The philosopher who guided this reflection did not believe in pretending. He believed in seeing clearly. And seeing clearly, even when what you see is uncomfortable, is a kind of dignity. You are not the story someone decided about you. You are not the impression you left on a difficult day. You are not reducible to the lens through which someone has chosen to watch you. And you do not need their accuracy to know your own. Sit with that for a moment. There is nothing to fix tonight, nothing to correct or perform or prove. Just the slow, honest recognition of how things are and the quiet knowledge that you were always more than what the room decided you were. That has always been true. It still is.